Hi, it's Christine at Cemetery of Choice. Today is August 18th, and we are going to look at a deadly secret and a victim of human wolves. The first death we look at today, and both of these are way pre-legalization. The first one was in 1901. A 28-year-old homemaker named Annie died in her Chicago home at around 4 a.m. on August 18th. Now, about 10 days earlier, she had confessed to her husband and to her mother that she was suffering from the effects of a criminal abortion, and she named midwife Teresa Munster as the perpetrator. So George, the husband, contacted the family doctor, and he recommended that George notify the police. And when Annie died, he did. The doctor notified the police. And George spoke very willingly to them. He said, "I had no idea that my wife had visited Mrs. Munster, and until she knew she was dying, she kept the matter a secret from me. When she learned that she was about to die, she called to her bedside her mother and myself. She declared that she had visited the Munster woman 3 times and that the midwife was responsible for her condition. She told us, moreover, that her brother's wife, Caroline, who died 2 years ago, had been a patient of the Munster woman, and that the second treatment by the midwife proved fatal to her. So I guess she must have just considered it a fluky thing when her brother's wife died, but when she realized she was dying too, she decided to just let people know that this midwife was up to no good. I don't know. We can't know what went through her mind. I am determined to see that justice is done and that somebody shall pay for the death of my wife." Munster was about 60 years old, and she had been a practicing Chicago midwife for about 30 years. And as I went through the homicide in Chicago database, I found that lots of these abortions were performed by midwives, but also some of these midwives were actually doctors. Female obstetricians were often referred to as midwives rather than doctors. So I've had to do a lot of research into whether they were midwives or they were doctors. George was left to care for their 2 small children. Munster was arrested and held by the coroner's jury, but I've been unable to determine the outcome of the case. Then, this second death was in Oklahoma in 1917, and I learned about this in a really roundabout way. As you can guess from the fact that I study abortion deaths, I do have kind of a morbid streak, and I'm very active on Find a Grave. And I was looking for memorials to the unborn. I can't even remember why at the time. So I had put in a keyword abortion, and I found this grave for Catherine Cross. And one of the Find a Grave participants was fascinated by her headstone, which read, "Murdered by Human Wolves." And this man added this news article. Now, this young woman was named Catherine, and said, "For the second time within 60 days, Dr. A.H. Yates is facing a charge of performing a criminal operation." So Catherine, murdered by human wolves, was actually the second abortion death attributed to Dr. Yates. So I've seen her name as Elsie and as Elise, but it was listed as Elsie more often, so I'm going to say that this young woman's name was Elsie. Elsie, an 18-year-old school teacher, went to the Kanoa, Oklahoma practice of Dr. A.H. Yates on August 15th, 1917, and shortly thereafter, she was moved to his home, and she died there. And Elsie's aunt later testified that Yates had summoned her to Kanoa after Elsie's death, saying that Elsie had taken ill while on a train passing through town, that they'd brought her to his practice, and that he'd then taken her to his home, and that she had died of congestive chill, which is what Yates put on her death certificate. But some concerned citizens complained to the county attorney, who ordered Elsie's body exhumed for an autopsy. And this shows you how different the world was then. Back then, they just unearth the body and they do the autopsy right at the cemetery. I've seen cases where they took the body like to a nearby house and did the autopsy there. It was a different world. But the real cause of her death was discovered. This Seminole County health officer said that she had died from an abortion that had probably been perpetrated about 24 hours prior to her death. And Yates was arrested along with Fred O'Neill, who had been principal of the school where Elsie had worked. O'Neill was a married man with 3 children and reportedly brought meals to Elsie while she was staying at Yates's practice. Now, 2 state's witnesses testified that Elsie had cried and told them how O'Neill had ruined her life. A woman named Beulah said that she had seen O'Neill hand Elsie a package that contained a letter and some medicine. And the other witness, identified in the news articles as Mrs. S.M. Thompson, said, quote, Elsie told me in June that she had been wronged. She showed me letters from Fred O'Neill which told her to take medicine, and that was all he could do for her, that he was a married man and couldn't afford to let it become public on him. She told me about how she was led off by this party, and she told me she was going to meet Yates and O'Neill and they were going to take care of her condition. So Yates and O'Neill were originally charged with murder, but because of legal technicalities, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. While awaiting trial for Elsie's death, Yates was arrested for Catherine's death. And both men were subsequently acquitted, even though the first vote of the jury was 11-1 for conviction. I would love to go, oh, don't you wish you could be a fly on the wall and know what had happened? So, again, we had a midwife and we had a physician, and given the circumstances, it's probably highly likely that they did indeed do these fatal abortions. So, the idea that before legalization, women just reflexively reached for the rustiest coat hanger in the closet, it doesn't hold water.